hire first for character and values and integrity. Everything else can be taught. We looked for people that we knew were going to become allies for each other and want to create the right environment for each other. If there's even a bit of a flag during the interview process on that, those folks are out. Do these people look like they're learners? Have they reached their ceiling, or are they actually still on an upward trajectory in their career and in their skill set and what they're doing? If we don't have great diversity in the teams that are building the technology, then there'll be bias in the technology that gets built. Does this person speak English? Because with her name, it sounds like there might be an accent issue. So like that in itself has been like—
it's so problematic. We're just gonna dive straight into it. Thank you so much for joining me today.
So good to be here. Thanks for having me.
I want to get straight into a kind of whistle-stop tour of your career, because I think that what I really want to talk to you about is the fact that like you've had such an incredible journey in getting to such an incredible top job. And I feel like a lot of what we see in the media is all about entrepreneurship. It's all about like really fast kind of rise to like this one thing. Yeah. And there's not a lot out there about actually kind of corporate climbing the ranks, like going exactly to kind of where you've got to and all of that. And I'd really like to explore that more and kind of talk about your journey for people who are kind of on that route as well. So just to kind of set the scene, could you give us a little whistle-stop tour of your career in kind of a few bullet points, if possible?
I'll try. I'll start actually towards the end of university, because my original intention actually, I was doing sociology and women's studies because I thought I was going to go into social work.
Okay.
I've just always had that passion to somehow want to change and positively impact the world. And so that's how I thought I was going to do it. I ended up taking a year off of school and ended up in Sri Lanka working for an NGO called Women in Need, helping women and children victims of domestic violence and rape. And I did that for about 6 months and realized that was not how I was going to be able to spend my career. It's just so emotionally heavy. Like the people who are in social work are a special kind of angel. And I didn't feel like I had the strength to do that. So that got scrapped. Now I end up leaving school with literally no idea what I'm going to do. In fact, my first job, my mom got me really at her company, which was a consumer goods company. It was a chicken and fish company in Canada where I was raised. And I fell into marketing, really. I was in consumer relations, I was in marketing, really decided I liked that. Like I liked product development and, and connecting with customers. I did that for a little while, but I realized it was just so slow moving, right? And it was a really predictable world to land yourself in when you're in the consumer goods world, right? It grows a certain percentage every single year. Right. And they're very predictable career paths, right? 2 years as a product manager, 2 years as a brand manager, 2 years as a senior. And I started to learn, okay, I don't like predictability. I need something more. And I wanted to learn how to shape things. So I ended up flipping over. I went customer facing, and I was working for a global market research company, which was fun because now I was sitting in a room with like VPs of sales and marketing and those that were actually creating the plans and strategies for their organizations, also still in the food and restaurant industry. So it was a lot of fun because I got to be in the room for those things and learn how that happened. But once again, really slow moving, predictable world, not a lot of growth, so not a lot of innovation. And so again, realized I need something more. I want to build stuff. I want to grow. And that is when actually I made my transition over to tech. First with a scale up that was actually out of Berlin that was looking to do North American and South American expansion and building their sales organizations. And it was so much fun. And then most recently, the last 6-7 years now at Shopify, first to build Shopify Plus, which was, kind of our large business kind of enterprise arm that we were just starting to build and figure out. And then to build EMEA for us for the last few years as well here in London.
Insane. I mean, you've been able to make that so concise, but I feel like it's not in
there's
terms
a lot
of
more there.
Yeah, like there's so much to that. And when you wanted to make that change from consumer to tech, How did you know that that was because I feel like we often get onto career paths, especially more in the corporate world.
Yeah.
And when you're on a job in a job that has a kind of very set path, it's easy to have that kind of invested time fallacy where you think that because you've spent X amount of time in this, you have to go forward in this. Otherwise, you're almost scrapping all of the time you've spent in things rather than going back and just kind of like sidestepping almost and being like, actually, I'm going to go up this stage. How did you kind of gather the confidence to be able to sidestep and say, do you know what? Consumer goods, I can now do tech.
Great question. It was a really hard decision, actually. I had a ton of fear. At the time, I was doing really well. I was the director of Canada for our food and restaurant business. I had great mentors. I had a really well laid out path for myself at this company that I was at. You know, people I liked to work with. It was all great. So this really was about taking a risk, and I was incredibly fearful, to be honest. It was actually my parents that said to me, you know, Shimona, nothing in life is irreversible. Why don't you just give it a shot? If it doesn't work out, you've built a great career here. You have people who respect you. You've got supporters. You can come back, right, in some capacity if it doesn't work. But what have you got to lose, right? And that was my first lesson, that almost everything in life is a two-way door. And I think that we often treat everything as a one-way door.
And I feel like it's a lot of the time as well, it's been from previous generations where the thing really is you earn your stripes in something for like 30, 40 years, then you get your success and then you move from there. Whereas like we very much have kind of moved towards more of this idea of the kind of portfolio career, both in terms of self-employment, in terms of side hustles, but also in terms of actually how you build your career. Like no one person is, you might be in a direct path, but you're going to have a different take on that direct path to this person next to you. You're going to have different skills that are going to mean that you can do it well. And like that is your superpower. But I feel like it is still terrifying. And there is still very much in your head this idea that actually, if I sidestep industry or job role or completely change it, rather than building on the experience I already have, we have in our brain that it's kind of like square one rather than just stepping onto a different ladder.
100%. You're absolutely right. I think that was our parents' generation. Whereas now, and I talk to a lot of our younger women at Shopify about this because we have a lot of folks that are, you know, kind of beginning of their careers, is careers are long, right? There's so many paths that you can potentially take and there's so much to learn. But there's also, for me particularly, a lot of like my career path up until now has really been what I call kind of a journey in self-awareness. Like, what am I actually good at? What do I want to do? What is the impact I want to have on this world? Like, where do I get my fulfillment, right? Versus feeling you needed to have to made that decision at 21 in school and then just keep doing that.
Well, that is what's so insane is that if you track the start of your career back to when you first graduate or when you first leave school, you think about it as a linear progression from essentially from there. Before then, you chose subjects for exams, especially in the UK, you obviously have to whittle down to literally 4 subjects if you're doing A-level, or 3 subjects if you're doing A-levels. And before that, you need to choose 4 specialist subjects with your GCSEs. So it's kind of like, you actually go back and realize that you've chosen your career at 15 or 14.
Can you imagine?
Which is insane. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense. And I think that the more we can get into our heads that you're never taking a step backwards, if you look ahead and you think, I'm doing this for 40 more years. Right. Like, if you really kind of think about it, I'm going to do it for 40 more years or at least a few more decades. There is nothing that 2 years or 3 years sidestepping or going maybe like a tiny bit down to go up is going to ruin about that. Yeah. That's, if anything, it can kind of make that better, which I think we're probably not taught as much because it's, you know, it's risk-taking.
It is risk-taking.
And when you were working up at your previous company and then also when you moved over to tech, what would you say the biggest challenges you kind of faced in terms of moving up through the ranks kind of traditionally? I know you said that there was a pretty set career path. Did you find that quite easy? Did you find it happened usually on time when you were expecting those promotions?
I found, so I'm generally an impatient person.
Right.
Probably why I needed to end up in tech where I could build things and I could really be a part of like how we drive forward. So I usually found that things were not happening at the pace that I wanted to because I wanted to learn. That's one of the things I've realized, right? I need to be learning and growing and getting better or I'm bored and stagnant. And so what I found, particularly the first part of my career, is I started to jump to make the next step happen, right? So if there's no space in this medium-sized company that's growing 3% a year to move up, great, then I'm going to go go find that at another company. Right. And so, and that was kind of that was how I kind of built progression for myself. But by the time I got to Shopify, actually, what I started to realize at that point is I wasn't getting fulfillment about like a title change or a raise. Where I was getting fulfillment was, who am I working with? What am I building? Who am I leading? Like, and do I get to build with my values? So again, a little bit of a self-awareness journey for me too.
100%, and just getting to know yourself throughout the process. And what did it feel like? Obviously, your job now is, I mean, it's an incredible title, and I have no doubt that the actual work is just as incredible and just, you know, fulfills you so much, as well as just kind of that title. But how did that feel at that moment that you got promoted, and what was kind of the story around that to you becoming the managing director?
Ooh, so here's actually how I approached my time here at Shopify for the last 6 years, because I had come to that realization that it wasn't just about like titles and raises and anything like that anymore. I picked Shopify because I really loved what they were doing, and I really fell in love with the people that I met. Right. And so I realized very early that Shopify was going to be a really special place to grow and build, as we've seen over the last 6 years and what they've been able to do. And so I told my bosses really early on, I was like, listen, if I get to work with you guys, because we were really aligned in values, if I get to build stuff, and if I get to be building and leading people, those are the 3 things I need. You can ask me to do anything you want, and I'll say yes, because I just want to enjoy my ride here. And what I committed to them then was always to make decisions based on what was best for Shopify. We were growing incredibly fast, as you and I have been talking about. So I committed to outlearning everyone as well. I was always trying to be prepared and learning for what was like what they were going to need to ask of me next. That's actually how I ended up progressing into, ending up in London, from Toronto, moving to London, being the MD of EMEA here. I was just trying to set myself up for, I was just trying to set us up for, what do we need to do next? How do I be prepared to help with that? Right? If you need to tap me on the shoulder, am I ready? Right? Are you going to have someone that you can look to be like, can you go help with this? Which is actually how it happened. They're like, hey, could you go to London and start to build the EMEA organization for us? Remember, you said you'd say yes to anything.
Exactly. Hold that over you.
Yeah. And so it was like, yeah, sure. Absolutely. It's an adventure. Why not?
Yeah. I mean, that's incredible. And I also feel like it's what you've said there about it being less, I mean, it's important obviously for us, especially as women, to never think that a title is too big for us. Like, and never absolutely be like, not. Do you know what, that wouldn't make sense for me. It absolutely would make sense for you, and that for you kind of even to think that is important. But I also think even just the point there about being less about the title, more about putting yourself in that position in the way that you're constantly learning, you're constantly progressing, you're constantly solving problems, and you're a yes person. Like, you're going to be saying yes to opportunities and saying yes to things that you probably feel absolutely terrified to do. 100%. And it says a lot about, rather than aiming for the title so much as putting yourself in the role, in the way you act, the way you learn, all of those things, which I absolutely love. And then when you moved to London, how did you set out going, do you know what? Okay, Shopify, I can do that here.
So when I first joined Shopify in 2017, for Shopify Plus, we were focused really that year and just starting to build some of the core of our team there. But it became really clear to us early on that there was just enough demand and momentum coming at us that we were just going to have to start growing in both in APAC as well as in EMEA faster than we thought. So we'd actually started from, Toronto itself to start to hire people remotely and put them out here. Right. So we had a few folks that we had been hiring and building here in London. So it was great because we had a core group of people that were super passionate, that were driving for us, that loved being in front of our merchants. And so when I got here in 2019, we had a nice tight group of folks that was, somewhere 12 to 20 people at that point. That was a good starting point. Yeah. And then we promptly ended up in COVID and in all the lockdowns. And so honestly, the journey for the last few years has been a few things. One is, just building the organization. I'm a really firm believer that if you've got the right people in place, everything else falls from that, right? Because you can't, as a leader particularly, like I can't do everything myself. If all of our success is going to be on my shoulders, we're effed.
Yeah.
So I better find some really, really great people that I want to build with, the same way that I was looking at my leaders before it, right? So the first step was to build a senior leadership team. And with that comes then the creativity, the experience, the know-how to think through how we figure out our path forward.
And how did you choose those people? I feel like my experience with hiring, so as I mentioned before, we pretty much doubled our headcount within the past 6 months, and it's been really exciting. And I'd say that before that, before I knew the types of people we wanted to hire, I definitely kind of didn't know how to hire in terms of I would always hire for experience rather than fit. And actually, you know, hiring for the type of person is really, really, really important. Of course, them having the experience and the skill set is incredibly, you know, I mean, you need it, but also hiring the wrong types of people for the types of culture you have is also not going to work. So how did you know who were the right types of people, and did you kind of make any mistakes in that?
Yes. So there's a few things that I'm adamant about when I'm hiring. In fact, I've always said to my team that if there's anything in leadership I'm good at, or my superpower, I think it's hiring, because I think I put together good teams. And I tell them that they're the example of that, right? Because I think they're phenomenal. So I'd say first and foremost, hire first for character and values and integrity. After that, everything else can be taught, right? Skill sets and all of those things, those can be built on. You can never teach character or integrity.
Completely agree.
So that is my grounding. If there's even a bit of a flag during the interview process on that, those folks are out. Yeah. Because that's where I start. And then I always look for what we would call like for slope instead of intercept. What I mean by that is, do these people look like they're learners? Have they reached their ceiling, or are they actually still on an upward trajectory in their career and in their skill set and what they're doing, versus hiring for that point in time? Because when we're in hyper-growth organizations, what you need today is very different than 3 months from now, right? And so are you hiring people that are going to be able to grow with and keep up with the company? So slope versus intercept. And then I was looking for complete diversity, right? So culture ads or team ads versus fit, right? So, and I'm really proud actually of what I've built. You know, I've got a mix of genders, orientations, family dynamics, backgrounds, you know, some from traditional business, some who are founders themselves, nationalities, languages, different communities, because those are the folks that are going to help us to build a team that represents the merchants that we represent, right? And then lastly, underneath all of that, when we talk about diversity of thought, a lot of different personalities as well, right? Who can balance my strengths, who can complement, you know, where my gaps are, so that we're actually building a more of a complete team versus like things that just automatically look the same.
Yeah. And I think that's the crucial thing. I think when people obviously talk about like hiring for fit, it's really easy to think that it kind of means hiring very similar types of people. And you can have very different types of people with very similar values. And that's obviously the aim, because you need to be able to, as you say, it adds to the team. It's like, we don't want 10 of the same people. We want 10 people with the same values who are very different. That's the ideal.
Absolutely. Because we're looking for, when you hire a bunch of the same, you end up again with all the same ideas. You don't represent the community that you're trying to serve. And you end up with what I think is like a false sense of harmony. If everyone gets along and agrees, you've got a problem. And when you've got like really true, like good diversity, hopefully you have really great, healthy conflict that interrogates ideas, that stretches each other. So you end up with something really great. And so that's the first thing that I look for.
I think that's so valuable. And I think that once you start to, I feel like pretty much every founder or team builder will learn that the hard way. Yep. And you're just then like, right, okay, there's a reason. I read everything. I read everything that told me exactly how to do it. And I still was like, that person worked at somewhere great before, perfect. Rather than it being like, no, this person shares the same values, shares the same, like, or kind of similar values in terms of leadership style and all of that. And I will not make that mistake again, because it is so, so important. Sorry. I
was about to say, I feel like I've done that exact same thing, particularly if it was an area or craft or discipline that I felt weak in, that I really went looking for someone that was just like, had a ton of experience in that area, because I just needed someone who was super smart, that I could trust. And that was often a mistake I made, because again, I forgot to go back to, did I look for character, integrity, values, and all of those things first, and slope versus intercept, or did I just look for someone that was just incredibly tenured, had done it over and over, that could just bring the knowledge that I didn't have. Because again, I was second guessing my own leadership.
Right. And talking about that, I'd like to talk a little bit about imposter syndrome. Now, I'm always really careful when I bring this up with women, because I think that a lot of the time, well, first of all, I find that I'm always asked on interviews about imposter syndrome. And it's also probably because we don't see women in leadership positions. We particularly don't see women of color in positions that they should be in. All of these different things that it's like, of course someone has imposter syndrome if they can't see anyone else within that space that looks like them. And I always want to be very careful about being like, do you have imposter syndrome? It kind of insinuates like you should, because actually the way, we see leadership is white men a lot of the time. So I'd like to talk a bit about that, and your experience with it, if you have had an experience with it. And so do you kind of, at the beginning, when you just kind of switched over to tech, or actually probably even before that, when you were leading up parts of you said the food business before, what did that kind of imposter syndrome look like for you?
Ooh, so really early on, when I was at the market research company, and I was, like I said, I was in those boardrooms with those, VPs of sales and the CEOs of these companies and the restaurants and all of that. Again, generally a fairly older demographic, often just, kind of a white dude environment. I think two things happen, right? A was they would see me as this like young girl who couldn't possibly know as much as them in some cases, not all. I had actually some really impressive and supportive clients who treated me like an equal in the room, right?
Yeah. Which shouldn't be a surprise, but
which shouldn't be a surprise, but I just want to, but it happened enough times that it caused me to second guess myself. And then from the flip side, so what that ended up doing is me starting to question how I was showing up in the room.
Right.
And like, do I need to act a different way? Do I need to be more bold and aggressive so that they listen to me? Do I need to dress a certain way? Right. I don't know about you, Grace, but like over the course of my career, I swear I've gotten like the advice in every direction.
Right.
Dress more femininely, so that you get the attention of, or you know what, you really need to dress down your femininity to like, so that you take control. And like, I just confused myself.
Either way, there's going to be a problem with it, I would say.
And so it actually took me years to just say, fuck it.
Yeah.
I'm going to show up as me.
Yeah.
And actually, I've heard Bozoma St. John say this before in a podcast, and this really resonated with me, which was, she said that when she stopped worrying so much about how she was showing up and just allowed herself to show up as her authentic self, all of that energy could now go towards being kick-ass at her job.
Right.
Right? Otherwise, we put all this energy into trying to be something, show up as something, and then you're learning, and how you show up in your work is going to suffer.
Well, I look back at when I'd first started to, I guess, lead a team. So when I first started to work more, essentially, my businesses became my job, my full-time job. And I think my imposter syndrome then meant that I was a far worse leader because I felt like I needed to act in a certain way. So I felt like I needed to act like, almost imposing opinions or views or demanding respect from people in a way that I actually as a person would never do. Like the way I work with people now is the way I talk to my friends. That doesn't mean that you can't say, do you know what? This isn't there yet. I need that done again. And we've talked about this before. Like, let's go over it if there's an issue. Like there's ways that you can say things without it being a problem. But I felt like I needed, because I don't think I necessarily knew how to be the right leader. And therefore, because I couldn't see a woman doing it that I could kind of, jump on, I kind of thought you need to be almost mean in order to lead. And that was my way of almost garnering respect, because I was like, no, I'm telling you what to do. Because in my head, I assumed, well, no one's going to take me seriously, so I'm going to make them take me seriously. Yes. And actually, now I'm a far better leader, I'd like to think, because I'm able to be like, it's not for me to convince you to take me seriously. This is how I'd like this done, and this is how we're going to do it, and I can back it up, and that's fine. And I can be really nice about it. But I feel like I was such a bad leader for so long because I felt like I needed to lead in a certain way that was this kind of very like male attributes thing that I'd been told, almost be less feminine to be a leader. And it just made me like, I'm great at leading now because I'm a nice human being. Like, and I kind of feel like that's the difference where, I don't know, I feel like it can really manifest.
Don't you feel like though that you kind of had to go through doing it bad for a little
100%.
while in order to discover that there was a better path. Because that was the same for me. I'm similar to you in that the first time I was leading, which was at that market research company, I was actually an awful leader. And it was because, I actually hadn't thought about going from individual contributor to leader being a career change.
Right.
I hadn't thought about whether I really wanted to do that and why I was doing it. And like you said, I didn't know what it really was to lead. So I thought I had to show up with all the answers. I had to show up decisive and point people in the right direction and know all the things. And so there was no vulnerability there at all. When I moved to tech, I actually went back to being an IC just for a few months. But the second time around for moving into leadership, now I was making a conscious decision versus just being a high performer that was promoted into the role. I had a better sense of like why I wanted to do it. That it wasn't about me and that it was really about building and giving, because we were in tech, we were in hypergrowth. So it was about building and getting people moving in the right direction together. And then at Shopify, particularly over the last 6-7 years, I've really started to hone in on like, what are my superpowers? What does it mean to be a great leader? Realizing actually that this is my life's work, is to be able to demonstrate to the world that you can build great organizations through great leadership. Because as we've seen over the last few years, there's a lot of bad leadership in this world. Like you can build like with vulnerability and empathy and build like great engaging organizations that are growing quickly while being a woman and a woman of color.
Yeah. So I would say that as well, within that point of kind of the leading with vulnerability, leading with kind of kindness and all of these things, I do think it must stem back to the idea of like the male leadership thing that we've kind of learned, as in rather than saying bring your great qualities to leadership, it's leadership looks like this because we know it looks like this and therefore replicate. And I feel like, as you said in the kind of point about being decisive, showing up with all the answers, all of these things, that is exactly what I would do. I would show up thinking, say I would be asked something, say I didn't understand 5 out of 7 words in the sentence, I would pretend I did. And like, then there would be like a decision and I'd be like, yeah, this one. Rather than like, there is no world that I would feel like I'd need to do that now because I have enough confidence as a leader. But I also think that because young men and especially young white men like will see in a position, it's kind of like you would almost expect to be in there, or not necessarily, that's a kind of huge generalization, but you can see someone that looks like you in that role. So you don't feel like you need to alter yourself hugely. Whereas like now I would go into a room where I have to make a decision and it would be like, hey, actually, do you know what? I don't know much about that. Can we just get some data or can we go through that for a second so I can fully understand that before making a decision?
Yes.
And every leader I've ever had that has led in that way, I've respected far more and I've been able to learn from far more. Yeah. And it was kind of like this sudden switch that I was like, oh, that's how you do it. It's not about actually just like imparting like, no, we're doing it this way because I say so. And like, that's that.
100%. I've really started to make it my career to study what I really think great leadership, but like from a flip side, what does followership actually mean?
Right.
What do people want to follow? Like you just said, right? Those that actually showed up and asked questions and create space to be vulnerable. Those are the ones that you want to follow, right? And it was the same. There's a book by John Maxwell called Developing the Leader Within. And actually in there, he talks about these 5 levels of leadership. Right. Like level 1 is positional leadership, right? So people follow you just because of what your title is and kind of because they have to. All the way up to what they call personhood, which is people follow you because of who you are. Right. And what you represent. Right.
It's not about title. It's about what you're doing on the everyday and all of these things. And you never need to kind of like reassert why. It's like, this is, and we're all doing this together. And how, when you kind of had these moments of imposter syndrome, how would you deal with that?
So how I've gotten good at dealing with that, how about this, versus maybe how I didn't deal well with it before. I think 2 things. One is, I think I've got the right, I have the right people around me now as well. And I also have a coach that I work with constantly around making sure that I'm self-aware, that I understand my strengths, that I'm showing up as my authentic self, that when I have those moments of imposter syndrome, that we're actually talking through what is the root of that, how do I get through it? But then also, like I said, I've got the right people around me, or what I call like my challenge circle, right? Really great people who are of diverse personality sets that I highly trust, that know me, that I know that I can go to for real talk. Right. And some of them are really close friends. Some of them have been really close colleagues now for the last few years. And I know, and they actually know they're in what I call my challenge circle. And so they know when I come to them that I'm asking them and I'm trusting them for real talk. Right. So they can say, Shimona, you know what you're doing. You know what you're doing. Yeah. Get over it and move forward.
And I think that's really important, especially because we all have what you call a challenge circle in terms of like the people around us. And I think we often go for kind of this, we go to the people who we need to confirm our biases when there's like a decision to be made. So if you want to be enabled on something, you'll probably go to your friend who's like, yeah, fuck it, do it. Like, great idea.
And if you buy that thing
exactly,
that you can't afford.
On the other side, like if you want to be told not to do something, you'll go to your really serious friend and then they're like, do you know what, this isn't a good idea. And it is so important to kind of almost be able to reverse that and be really conscious of that. And I'm always, I'm thinking, if I'm going to these three people, I know what I want them to say.
You know what I want to hear.
And being able to reverse that and just be like, no, if I can get that diverse input from all of these different personalities and then make my decision, that's going to be far more important. I think that's taken me a long time to learn because I'm a very impulsive person as well, and I'm very decisive. So when I decide something, I want to stick to it. And actually it's taken me a long time to learn, like, if you're calling that person, you're just going to do it anyway.
Right. So I'm guessing, and this is what I've had to do too, because I'm similar to you, is I've got a couple of friends who are really thoughtful, very pragmatic, really think about decisions before they make them. And I go to them to gut check and make sure that I've asked all the questions from all the angles to then figure out whether I'm making the right decision or not.
Yeah. And now when you have if you have kind of bad days around imposter syndrome or self-doubt or feeling like you kind of shouldn't be somewhere or shouldn't be where you're kind of trying to get to, what are your kind of coping mechanisms on those bad days?
I go back to why I'm doing what I'm doing. And so there's a bunch of work I've been doing for the last couple of years with my coach to really start to hone in on life's work. Because I started to realize like I'm doing great work for the companies that I work for, but I started to figure out through all this self-awareness, right, what am I good at? What brings me fulfillment? What is the actual impact I want to have on this world?
Right.
And therefore, what are the spaces how do I need to stretch myself? What are the spaces I need to put myself in? We talked a little bit about titles and things like that. And if my life's work, which is what I've kind of honed in on, is to demonstrate to the world that we can build great organizations with great leadership that builds engaging teams and diverse teams, and to widen the road for other women and women of color to come up behind me. Well, in order to do that, I'm going to have to put myself in positions that are prominent, where I allow the spotlight to be on me, where I probably have to think about like the titles and stretching for things in order to do that work, right? Which means I'm going to be scared. I'm going to be putting myself in positions that I'm not sure if I can do it because I haven't seen others do it before. I have to go back to, but Shimona, you said that this is the thing that you want to do for the world. You got to go try this.
So I think that's really valuable because I think it's almost saying when you have imposter syndrome, that is almost a thermostat saying you're doing the right thing.
I'm on the right track.
Because if you're putting yourself in a situation where you haven't seen someone like you before and you haven't felt like you could even get there, perfect. That means you're pushing all your boundaries. That means you're pushing the boundaries of societal expectations, all of these things. And it kind of confirms that that's the direction you need to go in.
100%. And then I also call a couple of my confirmation challenge circle folks, right? Who will remind me, right? Shimona, you're doing good things. Shimona, you're awesome, right? Every once in a while, we all need to hear that,
100%.
Right? And so I've got those that I can call who like can pump up my ego and remind me that I'm doing the right things for the right reasons. And I've Lauren Paddleford, who used to run Shopify Plus, constantly will tell me, like, Shimona, you can do hard things. You're absolutely right, I can. And
kind of coming back to leadership a little, what do you feel like your best traits as a leader are?
So there's a few skill sets I think that all leaders need to develop. And then you're right, there's some characteristics or like values by which we need to show up with. I think that from a skill set perspective as leaders, we all need to be great at like, if there's some fundamentals, like we all need to be really great at hiring. We need to be great at setting and holding high standards. We need to be really great at creating the conditions for success, right? Clarity for people. Where are we headed? Communicating. We need to be great at creating psychological safety so that people feel like they can show up, that they can take risks, that they can fail, that they can grow. We need to be great storytellers, and we need to be able to build great relationships. So I'd say within those, my superpowers have probably been definitely hiring. I'm really proud of the organization that I've built, and I can see that in the organizations that they've built. Like I went from, 12, 15 people, as we were saying a few years ago, and the organization's now, 700, 800 people. And I'm so proud of everyone that's come on board. I'm also really great at relationships, right? I'm good at building trust and connecting with people and being vulnerable and really learning and understanding like what drives and motivates people. And then allowing them to fulfill their passions, what drives them within the work that they're doing. Yeah,
no, I absolutely love that. And in terms of barriers that you've kind of come across, especially as a woman of color in leadership, I know you said that we should definitely talk about this. And what would you say those have kind of manifested as throughout your journey in terms of the barriers that you've had to either leading people well or even getting to the positions of leadership?
So there's been things as simple or as ridiculous as, when I've been put forth to go do talks, obviously for some of the work that I do, questions coming back to our teams asking, does this person speak English? Because with her name, it sounds like there might be an accent issue. So like that in itself has been like...
It's so problematic.
Right? And like that's the most basic thing. So like even things like that, like there's this advanced assumption that either I don't speak English or I'm going to have an accent that's not going to be understood. And I'm born and raised in Toronto. But even if I did, that shouldn't be the issue. Right. It should be the content, right? If we're building diverse environments where we're really learning about different cultures. So there's been things as basic as that. But then there has been, right? Like that, either that assumption that I'm either overly aggressive or overly assertive because I'm a woman in leadership and we must have had to have been like a super bitch to get ourselves there.
100%.
Or again, in the way that I've chosen to lead, vulnerability, authenticity, building really great high-performing teams, not just trying to be the loudest person in the room all the time, asking questions. That can, of course, if you've got a super aggressive A type of leader or environment of leaders, then that can kind of come off as like, well, that person's not opinionated enough. Right. They don't know what they're doing. We just need people who are just going to run and make decisions. It's not the right way to build an organization, in my opinion.
Of course. And I think that, it all comes back to the types of traits that we attribute to leaders are the same types of traits that we attribute to men. Like, as in, like, it's systemic. It's like part of the way we see leadership, and we've seen companies being, built and also led. And therefore it's always like, I almost think that what we often overlook is that we're not just going for kind of gender equity in terms of the leadership, but actually changing our views on leadership in order to be symbiotic with different traits that you kind of expect.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I think that's, I think it's really important to hear. And I think that there will be so many people who are kind of going into leadership positions and find themselves in leadership positions as well, because we, when you move up through the ranks, you are moving up through managerial kind of settings as well. And I feel like we're also not necessarily trained to be leaders or managers. Like it's almost seen as when you get good at your specialism, you become a people manager. Right. But how are those two things?
They're totally different careers. When you move, let's say you're a salesperson, when you move from salesperson to sales coach, sales leader, that is a complete change in careers. You happen to know the craft that you're coaching or leading, but the craft of leadership is its own craft. And you're absolutely right. Most people, like I said, I did that the first time. I didn't realize that that was what was happening. And so I didn't know how to make a conscious decision. And so that's actually something that we work on a lot at Shopify's leadership development, but that includes leadership preparedness.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a mistake I've made a lot as well when building the business here at Tala, is the fact that, you know, you give someone a promotion and you're really excited about it because they're really good at their job. Yeah. But actually, if you don't support them well enough, if that's their first step towards management, then it's not setting them up for success. And that is your job as a leader, to be setting them up for success. I feel like it's one of those ones where you think, oh, you've got really good at X, which is your job role. Therefore, you will have, you know, someone's coming in underneath you and you're going to be promoted to manager, and that's really exciting. But actually, if you haven't defined the parameters for success for that manager, or even just talk to them about being like, do you know what, you're 24, you haven't managed someone yet, this is going to be your first time doing that. Actually, these are the things that I found are really important. Lack of kind of mentorship, it doesn't need to be an official mentor, but just like communication with someone who has done that before, I think is so important. And definitely something I've overlooked a lot, and has meant that I haven't necessarily set people up for success when I've been trying to, you know, I've been trying to promote them and give them something exciting, but actually they are not, they have not had the preparation to be a manager, and therefore it's really hard for them to go from just doing their job to doing their job and also leading people.
You know, it was such a great lesson to have learned, right? Because I think we're, particularly in like high growth environments, we can sometimes default to just throw them in the default, into the deep end, right? And they'll figure out how to swim. I actually don't know if that's the right way to do things when people are switching from IC to leadership. They do need some support and understanding and prepared. They need the, you know, like the ring to help support them and keep them afloat for the first little while. And you're absolutely right. It's our job to make sure that they do that well, right? They understand what they're doing, why they're doing it. Because I also think it's a really scary spot to be when we promote those folks. They were really great at the thing that they were doing. And now for a little while, they're going to be really bad at this new thing. And that in itself can be incredibly difficult and really weigh on you emotionally, right? So we have to help them through that transition.
100%. And I want to speak for a second about women in tech. I'd love to know what you'd say to women who are perhaps a little bit afraid of going into tech because of the barriers, the kind of boundaries, the biases. If you could speak to someone right now who was kind of thinking of going down that path but was probably a little bit worried, what would you say to them?
We need you, right? And we talk about this, right? If we don't have great diversity in the teams that are building the technology, then there'll be bias in the technology that gets built, right? It doesn't get built for the audiences that we actually intend it for. Like at Shopify, you know, we've got an incredibly diverse merchant base that is global. You know, it's urban and it's rural. It's almost half women. And so if we don't have women who are in there building for women entrepreneurs, then we won't build the right thing, right? And so we absolutely need you. And again, so then I'd go back to the advice that my parents gave me, which is if it doesn't work out and you figure out you hate it, great, then go do something else. But I would always say, just give it a shot, because you don't know the impact you could actually have and the kind of learning there is in tech, right, to be had. Like it's so much fun when you're in an environment where you get to really build and shape something and then see how it impacts a customer, a merchant, an entrepreneur on the other end.
Yeah, no, I think that's so valuable. And also what you said earlier about kind of, what's your bigger goal? One of the best things about that, I guess, despite obviously the statistics being really awful about, you know, women in STEM subjects, I think it's 23% of people working in STEM are women, which is really quite low. I think one of the amazing things about then deciding to go into tech as a woman, or, you know, any of the other areas of STEM, is that as well as you doing your everyday job, you also get to pave the way for other people who kind of want to go into that. And I think that as much as that shouldn't be each individual person's battle to fight, it's also really valuable in being able to be like, do you know what? You're completely right. It might not work, but actually you get to try and do something that really makes a difference. And who knows, someone below you might see that even just for one day and think, do you know what? I can get there.
Absolutely. I'd say it's the same way that I went and I tried social work. And you know what, for me, that was the thing that was too hard, right? And I knew that it's going to be for someone else, but at least I tried it. So I'd say the same to women, right? Like they shouldn't beat themselves up if they got to tech and realize it is just not the right environment for them, but at least they will have tried, right? And for me, I'm the one that realized that my life's work is going to be to widen the road for, right? So now I can focus on how do we ensure that we've created the right environment and space for more women to enter, to choose tech, to choose sales, and other revenue and commercial kinds of careers, and then to be able to progress and see success in whatever that means for them.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really important. And when you switched to tech, did any of those kind of fears about that gender disparity kind of realize themselves in any way in terms of the lack of people there or the way you were treated?
I actually have to say, and maybe this is the reason why I've had the success I have, that I've been actually incredibly blessed to be in a couple of great environments.
Right.
So the first company I was at before Shopify was based in Berlin, and they'd actually built a young global organization.
Right.
That was based in Berlin, like literally from every part of the world. And so we had a really fun, young, dynamic, incredibly diverse environment, which made it a little bit easier, again, to start to see your way through all of that. And then when I got to Shopify, I was telling you, right? I came here because I fell in love with the people.
Yeah.
Right. Like the guy that hired me, Mark Bergen, who's been my boss actually almost for 6 years now, is easily the best leader I've ever met. He leads with empathy and vulnerability. And I saw in him actually the kind of leader that I wanted to become. Right. And then Lauren Paddleford, who was leading Shopify Plus at the time, is like a phenomenal leader and knew how to really motivate a team, but led with a lot of softness and empathy when he was talking to you one-on-one. And both of them have been incredible champions and allies for me. So I've ended up actually with really great supporters and allies in my journey, which has probably made it a little bit easier for me, right? So if there's anything I would say to women is when you do choose an environment, try your best to also choose the people you're going to work with, because what you're going to need likely is really awesome people who are supporters, who are allies for you that you can be around, right? And I found that there were mentors, supporters, allies that I've actually been able to surround myself with.
And you said that what you're kind of trying to create is very much a space where women feel like they can come into, and it's not they're not going to be othered in any way, and they're going to feel like they can progress in the same way as anyone else. How can that type of environment be created in the workspace?
So it all starts with, like I said, the people and the values and the characters, right? And so we were really adamant. So as Mark Bergen and I, as we started originally building like the sales organization for Shopify Plus, we were very adamant that we weren't just going to find quota crushing, like give me my number and leave me alone salespeople. We intentionally made a decision that we were going to find really great people of high integrity who wanted to be customer focused, who wanted to be in a team environment. And so we hired for that, which means we looked for good humans, right? And we looked for team players, and we looked for people that wanted to better each other. We looked for people that we knew were going to become allies for each other and want to create the right environment for each other. You have to start with the right ingredients if you're going to get the right result at the end, which is a great environment for women or any underrepresented group to be able to work. You have to start with building it from scratch. And the mistake I think that often can be made, particularly in hypergrowth, is like we just need to get bums in seats. So you start to let your standards fall a little bit because you just need the people in seat. And where I think that we did well early is we never lowered our standards, right? Because sometimes you can say it's like, okay, just need the people in seat now, and then we'll get to diversity later, right? We'll solve for that next year. It'll be harder later than it is now.
Yeah.
So start now, start early, and then you can actually build the right environment.
And how would you say for people practically trying to grow very fast and get people in those roles, how would you, because often, right, it's really hard to find the right person for a role. And at some point, once it's been 3 months of not finding someone, it gets difficult. How would you recommend that people prioritize both diversity and getting people in the roles while they're kind of vacant and you need to be growing fast?
Because they exist, right? So I work really closely with our talent acquisition organization and partners. And when we've sat down, and like I said, when I was trying to build my SLT, myself and Luke, who was my talent acquisition partner at the time, he and I had a really great conversation of what my intention was for the kind of organization I wanted to build, what I was looking for in my SLT. Is like, Luke, when we're done hiring, these, 10, 12 people, this is what I'd like the result to be. Mm-hmm. And so he and I went on that journey together, which means that he spent a lot of time tapping into networks that were maybe non-traditional. He spent a lot of time in sourcing versus solely just taking in applications, because applications, particularly in tech, tend to be like just, white male driven.
Yeah.
Because not a lot of women are coming in, or people of color. So we spent a lot of time with intentional sourcing in a lot of places. We tapped into networks and communities that we wouldn't look for. And once again, right, we weren't necessarily always looking for just the perfect experience. I was looking first for character, integrity, and culture add, and then also a skill set that I wanted to work with. Yeah. So it's intention up front as to what we were going to build together, a lot of sourcing, and a lot of tapping into communities and areas that we that wouldn't naturally happen, and we weren't hiring just by application.
Yeah, and I think that is so important, and it is just kind of showing it's not too difficult. It's just about the way you do it, and having that inherent in your hiring process makes it happen.
And then I'd add to that, is your interview process as well. We made sure there was diversity on the interview panels, right? So we ensured that we were bringing lots of different personality types, different genders, all of that to the panel, so that we didn't insert bias into how we assessed people and brought them in.
100%, and so important. I want to do a little section on side hustles.
Sure.
I know that we've kind of talked about that before, and I personally started my side hustle with a Shopify plugin, and I mean, that did great things for me. That was actually the only way I was able to kind of get up and running so quickly. It was about a 12-hour process from inception to actual launch. So I wanted to. I've asked people on Instagram to kind of send in their questions in terms of starting their side hustles, anything kind of around that. I just firstly, to ask what you recommend for people wanting to start their side hustles now with the presence of platforms such as Shopify. I mean, it makes it so easy in so many ways, and I'd love to hear your advice for that.
Sure. In fact, I was at LBS this past weekend, London Business School. And they actually had a global conference where they brought in professors from around the world, INSEAD and Harvard and all of that, talking specifically about entrepreneurship and business. And I was leading a panel with a couple of our merchants, both women of color, on Shopify and no-code entrepreneurship and how it can empower entrepreneurship, particularly for underrepresented groups where it's so difficult to get funding, right? We know women get 2% of VC funding. And so this is where I'm really proud, is that Shopify actually does make it easy, like you just said, 12 hours to get your store up and running. So we had Rosh with us, who runs Alighieri Jewelry. And she started her company 8.5 years ago, again, out of her parents' home. She had studied French and Italian literature in school, realized she was unemployable, and wanted to start a business. And she was easily able to, with her brother's help, figure out how to, build a Shopify store and start to figure out how she could, develop and create this jewelry. She took a class in order to do that and really just started to build from there, as well as Omolola Jewelry, two young Nigerian sisters, again, in the London area, who started Omolola actually as a side hustle. One was studying her PhD in law. One was a speech pathologist, I think. And they decided that they wanted to sell African-inspired jewelry to connect with their community as a side hustle. And they started it with $200 and absolutely no experience. And it's actually become their full-time hustle now. And so my advice always is find a platform and technology that allows you to get up and running quickly without a ton of expertise needed. I have no technical skills whatsoever, and I can build a store. Take advantage of our 24/7 support. They're there to help as you get going. And just start, because you don't know what's going to happen unless you just start and you play with it.
Yeah, and I think that's so the whole idea for there's a book called The Lean Startup for people who don't know, and the whole concept around it is about getting a minimum viable product out there. So your first product that can relate to your audience in some way. It doesn't need to be your end goal app. It doesn't need to be your kind of end goal product, whatever it might be, but it's about getting something out there that gives you direction in terms of what your customer wants, what they respond to, what marketing they like, all of that. And I think things like Shopify and being able to build it so easily made that my minimum viable product was a PDF. Like it's turned into an app now, and that obviously took hundreds of thousands to build, and I never would have been able to be at that position at the time. But actually that took me £50. It took me £50 to ask my friend to mock up the PDF to make it look nice. She was a graphic design student. And then I built my Shopify site just using a theme. And then I downloaded the kind of digital download plugin so that every customer who purchased it would get it delivered straight to their email. And that was it. That was literally it. And I think that minimum viable products used to be much harder. And now, even if it's just like a quiz to your potential customers, even if it's a PDF, even if it, like, whatever it might be, getting that out there as quickly as possible. You never want to get out there with your perfect product. And if you think it's your perfect product, you launched it too late.
100%. I love your story because it actually summarizes everything that we're trying to do at Shopify, which is remove all the barriers to entry to entrepreneurship. And for me, particularly proud that we can do that for underrepresented groups. But we've also reduced the cost of failure to almost zero, right? And so there should be no fear in starting and giving it a shot, right? Like you said, you started with $50. Omalola started their business with $200. And you can just get going and see what happens. And it can be on the side of all the things you're already doing. So there's no risk to it.
Well, people always used to say to me, they were like, how did you take the leap to start your business? And I was like, there was no leap. There was literally a bit of work getting it up. And then it was like, oh no, I will be the first person to say I struck gold. I did. Mine took off very quickly, and I'm obviously kind of hugely grateful for that, and that won't always be the case. But if it hadn't, it would have cost me £50.
Yes.
And that's it. And to be able to have access to tech like that now, 15 years ago, I mean, not even 15 years ago, we would just be, you'd be paying so much for that, which is exactly why, especially for diverse founders, that would have been almost impossible, because if we know now how bad the stats are, imagine how bad they were 10, 15 years ago. Yeah. Now, I want to get some of these questions.
Sure.
Let's find them. Let's see what people are asking.
Sure.
What types of questions on side hustles? Oh God, that's not meant to play. Would you? Oh, I need to go and find the thing again. It's been more than 24 hours, so I have to go and find my button. What types of questions do you think will be best place to answer off record? Best place to answer in terms of side hustles.
No, give it a shot. Throw something at me.
Perfect.
And I'll let you know if I think I've got a good answer for you or not.
Okay. 1 second.
If they're starting to get really deep on exactly how to convert,
yeah,
we probably don't want to do that. You'd be better off answering that than I would.
So, literally just the tiniest start. How do I start moving onwards so this person's on Facebook Marketplace and she wants to make it a business. So how does she take the step to move from Facebook Marketplace to move to having it might be a storefront, it might be whatever it might be.
You know what, you and I can go back and forth on this one a little bit, because it really is as simple as go to shopify.com, go to start a trial. We do free 14-day trial where you can go in, you can figure out how to build and design your site, be able to upload pictures of your products, think about the channels that you want to connect to, how you're going to take payments. We've got 24/7 support that's available when you run into any walls and can figure out how to move forward. But I think it's really great that the person started with a marketplace. That means they've got an idea of the products that they want to sell. They probably have a little bit of an idea of their customer base. And now with Shopify, they can actually start to go multi-channel, right? Which is truly now reaching your customers wherever they are. And if they've got some demographics, they can think about how they're targeting, where do they want to focus on, who is their customer going to be, what is the story they want to tell them. But go start a 14-day trial.
Yeah. And so this person's asked, how do you judge with a business if it has the potential to grow, to take the next step before taking any big risks?
This is such a hard question to answer, because if you and I take a look around at some of the businesses that we've seen grow phenomenally over the last 5 or 6 years, how many of them are just like, I didn't know that idea could be such a big thing, right? And so I really think that it's, if you really believe in the product or the problem that you're trying to solve, and that you've got enough feedback. So we talked about minimum viable product, but you've got enough feedback around like what your product fit is, and you truly understand who it is you're solving a problem for, what is the problem you're solving, in what way you're doing it uniquely, and that you've understood what roadblocks you might come up against. Is it easy to duplicate? Is there another competitor that can do it? What is the unique story that you want to tell? Go for it.
Yeah, and I think there's 2 things that I would kind of say in response to this question.
Tell me.
The first would be minimum viable product, and actually just getting as much information on your kind of customer and what they want as physically possible. And then also just trying it, just kind of like whatever it might be, get it out there, suss it out. And then I'd say in terms of scalability as a whole, the really clear pointers to whether something is scalable is whether it's restricted by your time. So for example, something artisanal will be limited in its scalability. You absolutely can get multiple other people to be making it. It's going to be slower at scaling than something that can be mass produced on a larger level, or that's digital, that's tech-based, any of these things. But actually, I feel like just making sure you know exactly how much your time limits the growth of the business, then there's usually a load of things that you can do to make it more scalable. It also, I think, is really valuable is knowing what type of business you want to build, because not everyone is suited to building a big business. Not everyone is suited to having a small lifestyle business, and actually deciphering how scalable do you want it to be? Because at the same time, if something you're not going to be able to keep up with the demand, and you do want it to be smaller and more artisanal or whatever it might be, I think that's really valuable to know too.
Yeah, funny story. As you were talking, I realized I've been through this exact thing. About 10 years ago, I started a side hustle.
Really?
I was an excellent baker growing up. And everyone always had told me, like, Shimona, you really should be doing this as a business. And so I finally decided to start. I did it as a side hustle. I had some corporate accounts. I was doing like wedding showers and like corporate accounts, like cheesecakes. And at that time, the cupcake thing had just started. So I was doing a lot of cupcakes. It was called Sugar Mama.
Love that.
Oh yeah, it was so much fun. But I hit the exact wall that you were talking about. It was like, there's a point at which I'm either going to have to make a massive investment into OpEx and like kitchens and staff, because it's either me and my effort solely or a really big like enterprise. And that was actually the moment that I made the decision that for me, the risk wasn't worth it, right? I didn't want it to take up all of my time, and I wasn't ready to put in all of that investment into something that could just be a fad, right? When it was cupcakes at the time. And so for me, I ran into that exact same scalability wall you talked about.
Yeah, I know. I absolutely love that. So this person's asked, how do I overcome the fear of failure in knowing whether to turn my side hustle into a full business?
It's such a tough one. One foot in front of the other, right? I think I've done this myself, where I've psyched myself out sometimes when I start to look too many steps ahead to like, I'm going to have X position, or I'm going to build X size business, or I'm going to have X impact in the world. I get very overwhelmed, right? And so even though that might be sitting out there somewhere for me, it actually needs to start with like, to make it actionable and to not freeze myself, I got to focus 1 foot in front of the other, 1 foot in front of the other, 1 foot in front of the other. But also, and this is, I know it's hard to internalize, and I know we hear people say it all the time, but failure is a part of success. And the faster that we as business people, as entrepreneurs, as anyone get used to that and try and get comfortable with that, the failure is actually what leads to success, right? And we haven't seen a single amazing business been built that didn't start with their stories around, I heard no, 872 times before I got the yes, right? So-and-so, said they would never invest in me, or told me this was a stupid idea. Like the guy that founded FedEx got a C on that project in university. It was told it wasn't viable. And now this is FedEx today, right? You've heard Steve Jobs talk about the no's. And anyone who's built anything great has had to go through failure. And I know like we're raised to believe that failure is wrong, right? We grades in schools, all of those things. And then as entrepreneurs, we actually have to flip that mindset to realize that failure is actually a good thing, right? Failure, Toby Luca, the CEO of Shopify, says this: failure is actually just the discovery of how we don't want to do it again. Right? Great. Okay, I've discovered one way that's not going to work. What's the next way? And so that's actually my advice: is you're going to have to get comfortable with failure is actually the path to success, in one foot in front of the other.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And it's, I guess, all around the idea that if you're failing, then you're doing it right. If you're failing, you're going in the right direction. If you're failing, you're showing yourself either directions that you don't necessarily want to go. Like you cannot expect to set down a path that you don't know where that path goes and know that it's going to be the right direction.
Yeah.
You have to, each time you come into an obstacle and it shows you how not to do something, that is I know it sounds so annoying when it's like it's a learning experience, but it is. You didn't know that until you had that. Like every single, mistake I've ever made or I've talked about on this podcast has been the only opportunity where I would have learned that. Yeah. I think, when I talk about the mistakes I've made in terms of hiring or leadership or any of these things, I read countless books that told me exactly those things before.
Yeah.
Like I heard it. I knew the whole, like, if it's not a fuck yes, then it's a no. Like if it's a, like all of these things. And still, time and time again,
you're in the moment.
Yeah, and like it's so natural, and we cannot learn without doing the majority of the time. And I still would encourage people to read a lot. And when you read a lot and absorb these things and people tell you what not to do, you probably learn faster after you've made the mistake, because 100%. You're like, I recognize it. I see why this person said this, and you're able to take their word for it.
Yeah.
But I really do think that, as you said, you cannot get anywhere without failing. And I also feel like you're not pushing the boat out enough if you're not failing regularly, because fucking hell do I fail every single day of the week, at least in one thing. And I think that if I wasn't doing that, then we wouldn't be going in the direction that we needed to be going in.
If you were doing all the things that you knew guaranteed success, that you knew the outcomes of, then you would just stay in the same place, right? It wouldn't be about growth and stretching into new areas.
Yeah, and I actually think, I'm not going to ask you another question. I think that's a really, really good place to end. I think that is so powerful, what you've said in terms of failure. And I feel like we all need to kind of internalize and think that more. But thank you so much for coming on. This has been incredibly insightful. I've learned a lot. And yeah, I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. I learned a lot too. So I really appreciate being with you.
A group learning session.
Yes, it was.
Thank you so much.